All right, how you doing, Westside? Hey, I doubt that I've got to convince anybody of this because I think pretty much everybody knows this already. It's pretty universally understood that our hearts determine our destinies. Yes, that line does totally sound like it's from an 80s rock ballad, doesn't it? But it is true. It is true. Our hearts determine the shape of our lives. Our hearts, our desires influence our choices, and then our choices, well, good grief. I mean, what is your life if it isn't the sum of all the choices that you've made, right? From the macro choices all the way down to the micro. From who am I going to spend the rest of my life with, all the way down to how am I going to spend the next 5 minutes of my life. Your whole life is simply the materialization of the trillions of decisions, large and small, that you've made up to this point. And if you were to ever pause and rewind the video at any moment and trace any one of those single decisions back to their origin, to their source, you're going to find a desire or a combination of desires. You're going to find something that you wanted. Your heart, your unique mix of desires and decisions, it is what determines the shape of your life right now and 20 years from now. It is literally and metaphorically at the center of who you are and who you are becoming. You already know your life flows out of your heart. That's why today's proverb says this. Proverbs 4 says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." Another translation says, "For your heart is the source of all life's consequences. All the things that comprise your life spring forth and flow from your heart. Therefore, of chief importance above everything else, guard your heart. Protect it, nurture it, feed it good food, not junk. Keep it right so that your life will be right." Guard your heart. Now, that's not really language that you hear very often these days. Matter of fact, that flies right in the face. That's pretty much the opposite of the message that you tend to hear in our world. Our world says that if you want the good life, you got to not guard your heart, you got to follow your heart. I mean, that is preached and sung so often, it has become cliche. Follow your heart. That is totally the stuff of 80s rock ballads, right? From Tribute to REO Speedwagon. Matter of fact, the Scorpions are apparently still singing this line. They sing, "To see the light in the dark, you got to follow your heart." Scorpions. I'm just relieved to learn that the Scorpions are still putting out killer hits like that, right? Follow your heart. That line still sells, man. Figure out what your heart is wanting and then go in that direction. Do what makes you feel good. Let the desires of your heart guide you. That's how you learn to live your truth so that you can go do you as if the desires of the human heart are wise enough, are good enough to lead you into the good life. And this logic of our world is coupled with a very fixed concept of our heart and our identity, as if our hearts aren't malleable and changeable, as if it's not partially, at least, our responsibility to train our hearts to want the right things. Selena Gomez sings, "The heart wants what it wants," right? Now, she could be borrowing that line from Emily Dickinson, but it's more likely that she has unknowingly borrowed that line from Woody Allen, who said in an interview, rather infamous interview in 1992, this rather iconic line that since has been just romanticized again and again. He had just ended his 12-year off and on relationship with Mia Farrow, and he had just begun his public relationship with her daughter, Soon-Yi Previn, something of a stepdaughter to him. Alan was 56, Previn was 22. And in defense of this controversial relationship, he said this. He said, "The heart wants what it wants. There's no logic to those things. You meet someone, you fall in love, and that's that, right? The heart wants what it wants, as if to say, hey, it is what it is. I don't have the power to change it. I don't have control over this thing inside me. I mean, it's got a mind of its own, you know? Who am I to question my heart, let alone train it to want something other than what it wants? I am at the mercy of my heart's desires, right? Well, I guess there's some truth to that, a little bit. There's certainly enough truth for it to be believable. But in the end, it's only half true. In the end, it's only telling half of the story. The other half says that we are at least partially responsible for what our hearts desire. We help determine the shape of the thing that determines the shape of our lives. Our world teaches that it's wrong and cruel, even self-destructive and harmful to deprive our hearts of the things that they want. Man, that's the real you in there. Don't suppress that. Don't suppress the real you. No, you be you, following your heart, doing what it tells you it wants. That's how you discover who you are. That's how you discover your most authentic life and live it. That logic there forgets two truths. First of all, it forgets that our desires have been corrupted. They've become disordered. They are out of whack. They are off target. If we wanted the right things all the time, then yes, the mantra, follow your heart, would be excellent advice. But we so rarely want the right things when left to our own devices. We so often want things that are clearly not good for us. I mean, seriously, can you imagine if I were to commit myself to doing only what I felt like doing whenever I felt like doing it? Can you imagine the condition of my life after a week? I mean, that would not do any favors for my marriage or any of my other relationships for that matter. I'll tell you that. That's not the way to the best version of myself. That's probably the fastest way for me to get a prison cell wrapped around me is what it probably is going to end up. I mean, it seems just quite evident that the desires of our hearts have been corrupted and they cannot be trusted to lead us to our truest self. Secondly, that logic forgets that our desires are layered. There are things that we want, and then there are things that we really want. We are at any given moment a mixture of different things that we want, ranging from superficial desires all the way down to the deepest, most foundational values. I want that second piece of cheesecake, but what I really want is to live past 60. I want to hit the snooze button again and climb back in bed. What I really want is to live a life purpose. I want to complain about that guy, but what I really want is to live in right relationships with everyone. I want to be angry, but what I really want is peace. Each of us is always just a mixture of desires. And as John Mark Comer says, your deeper, truer desires are not necessarily your strongest desires. There's a pretty common misunderstanding in our world about authenticity. It defines authenticity, living authentically, as doing what you feel like doing. So then, when you extend that logic, that definition, doing the right thing when you don't feel like it, maybe out of some sense of duty to some higher principle or even some higher authority, living like that is being fake. That doing the right thing when you don't feel like it is living inauthentically. That's a tragic misunderstanding of authenticity. Because when you're doing the right thing, even when you don't feel like it, when you're doing the right thing, you're actually being true to your deeper, truer desires, though they be quieter. You're allowing those quieter desires to override your shallower, less true desires. Don't call that being inauthentic. That's not being fake. That's actually living out of a deeper, truer version of yourself. You will never find your truest self by following your heart, though you might find it by leading your heart. It just, as long as you're leading it in the right direction. One of my favorite Eddie Lowenisms says, right feelings follow right actions. You ever heard him say that? So if you want to feel a sense of love for your enemy, then treat your enemy lovingly. Speak about your enemy as if you felt love for that person. And then watch what happens. Feelings of love will follow. If you want to love your spouse, feel those feelings of love for your spouse. Serve your spouse. Affirm your spouse. Speak words of kindness and gratitude to and about your spouse. And watch what happens. The feelings of love will follow. If you want to feel grateful for your life, speak words of gratitude for the things that are good and right in your life, and the feelings of gratitude will follow. If you want to feel motivated to get off the couch and live life to the fullest, then get off the couch and live your life, and the motivation will follow. If you want to feel courageous, do something courageous. Feelings of bravery and courage will follow. So how do we guard this heart? Well, there's probably hundreds, actually, of ways that the Bible might suggest that we guard our hearts. But the way that this proverb teaches, looks like the author here gives us 3 ways that we guard our heart. We guard our hearts by managing 3 other body parts, right? Our mouths, our eyes, and our feet. Here's what it says. It says, keep your mouth free from perversity. Keep corrupt talk, crooked talk far from your lips. Look straight ahead. Fix your eyes on what lies before you. Mark out a straight path for your feet. Stay on that safe path. Don't get sidetracked. Keep your feet from following evil. So first of all, you guard your heart by managing your mouth. Have you ever noticed the connection between your mouth and your heart? And by mouth, I'm, of course, talking about your words, right? There's a couple ways in which these are connected. The obvious connection point is that your words express the things that are going on in your heart. With words, you can articulate the feelings that are happening in your heart. That's part of a healthy life, is expressing feelings of sadness and anger and frustration and disappointment, as well as joy and silliness. Like, this is one of the best parts of being human, is our ability to articulate our invisible emotional worlds. So often, naming our feelings and fears ends up taming those feelings and fears. And I'm not just talking, I'm not at all talking actually about what you might call venting. As if, venting your anger, as if what you need is you just need to explode with angry words to get all that hot steam out of your body, right? And then you won't be angry anymore, right? No. Oh, man, venting is a terrible metaphor. It's a terribly misleading language for what is actually happening. Maybe you've noticed that when you vent your anger, you don't typically feel less angry, less full of resentment and contempt afterward, right? If anything, you have solidified your contempt. Maybe you've tried to get other people on your side and you've multiplied your contempt with others. No, venting does not tame your feelings, and it does not guard your heart. We're not talking about venting. Now, processing is a much better word. That's a more instructive word for a far more constructive process. It's what your healthy heart does with words. When you process your feelings with someone who's trustworthy and wise, you're doing so in hopes that they can help you name some of these feelings that are going on in your heart, and then maybe help you know what to do with those feelings, so that they're not coming out sideways as addictions or as aggressions or as some other form of self-destructiveness, right? And if you got a really good friend, they might even help you have that tough conversation that you might need to have that would be good for your heart and good for theirs. Healthy emotional expression is just part of guarding and nurturing a healthy heart. But your words don't just express your heart. That's the obvious way they connect, but the less obvious connection is that your words shape your heart. James in the New Testament is the one who makes this point most clearly. He's talking about the tongue, using the tongue in our mouths as a metaphor for our words, right? And he says this in James 3. He says, we can make a large horse, a giant animal, go wherever we want by means of a tiny, small little bit in its mouth. And a small, tiny little rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even though the winds are strong. In the same way, the tongue, the words that we speak, is small. It's a small thing, but it makes grand speeches that I suppose could move whole nations. A tiny spark can set a huge great forest on fire. And among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire. It is a whole world of wickedness, corrupting your whole body, entire body. It can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself. Whoa, beware, he says. Where your words go, your whole soul, your heart follows. Just like that tiny little bit in the mouth of a giant horse. Wherever that bit goes, that horse, that whole animal is going to follow. Just like that tiny rudder in the back of a giant ship, massive vessel. You steer that enormous vessel with that tiny little rudder in the back. You aim the rudder where you want the ship to go. Your tongue, your mouth, your words, they are like that. They are small. So small, you're going to be tempted to overlook them. Don't overlook them, because they steer the entire direction of your heart and life and soul. So when you use words of gratitude, words of encouragement and affirmation, words of kindness and patience, calm and non-anxious words, your heart will follow. And when you use words of contempt and discouragement, insult, criticism, harsh and impatient words, anxious and fearful words, your heart will follow. The stories that you tell and retell, when you tell clever stories, casting yourself as the victim and someone else as the villain, heads up, those are shaping your life. So Chelsea and I are doing our best to raise our 3 girls. And we, in our home, have 3 categories of words. Category 1 is words that are totally okay for anyone to use. You know, most words fit in category 1. Category 2 are the bad words. Category 2 are words that are not okay for anyone to use. And then we got a third category of words that may or may not be okay to use, depending on your age and maturity. They're not bad words per se, but, you know, they're words that we don't want our young children using, right? For example, crap is a word in the third category, right? It's not a bad word. I mean, matter of fact, it actually is a decent substitute, useful substitute for a bad word. But still, it's not one we want our young children using around our home. You know what I mean? And if we hear them using a category 3 word, we might question, I don't think you're old enough to use that word yet. Let's come up with a different way of saying what you're trying to say there, right? Now, this might surprise you, but one of the words for us that we've put in the third category is the word hate. Hate. It's not a bad word. It's not wrong to hate certain things. It's wrong to hate people, of course, but it's not wrong to hate things. But in order to use that word in our home, you got to be at a certain level of maturity. You've got to show some level of understanding of how words work, what they do in us when we use them. You got to know that words don't simply express your feelings inside. They also shape us and solidify feelings inside of us. And so when you say you hate asparagus, you're not only expressing your feelings of disgust and contempt, you are also making those feelings a notch more permanent, lasting. You got to be careful with that word, hate. Man, I'm not even sure I'm old enough, mature enough to use that word, come to think of it. You guard your heart by managing your words. Secondly, you guard your heart by directing your eyes, right? Our passage says, look straight ahead. Fix your eyes on what lies before you. Stay focused on where you want to go. Another translation says, ignore all sideshow distractions. I like that line. I remember learning to drive. I had my permit, Dad was riding shotgun, and I'm behind the wheel on a country road, and I got my fists clenched at 10 and 2. I mean, I'm just trying to keep that car on my side of the road, I'm concentrating. And all of a sudden, a bright red head of a ringneck pheasant pokes up out of the weeds in the ditch to my right. Dad, of course, points it out. So I looked to my right. And, sure enough, I started to veer right off the road. And my car went where my eyes went. And Dad is over, aggressively pumping the imaginary air brakes, right? Keep your eyes on the road, son, look straight ahead, right? And we didn't end up in the ditch, but it was, if I recall, pretty close. It was a lasting memory. And that was an important lesson for me to learn that day, that you tend to go in the direction that your eyes go. If you want to stay on the road, you got to keep your eyes on the road. Hey, heads up, we enter a world loaded with sideline distractions, loads of trivial things that do not actually help you move toward a better life. So much of our visual world is designed to get your attention through distraction and then keep it through addiction. Countless advertisements and apps are designed this way, competing for your attention because their business models depend on it. Has anyone on the planet grown more content by scrolling through images on Insta Envy Generator? Has anyone grown less anxious by looking at the news headlines? Less outraged by looking at Twitter posts? What do you spend your time looking at? And does it have anything to do with where you're wanting to go? You got to beware. Your eyes are downloading content that is saved in your mind and in your heart. Your will, your desires, and the priorities that you place on those desires, all of that is shaped through your eyeballs. Now, I'm guessing you've observed this already in yourself, in your kids, in your grandkids, in your society. So I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But you are what your eyeballs eat. You know that. Finally, you guard your heart by directing your feet. Proverbs says, mark out a straight path for your feet. Stay on that safe path. Don't get sidetracked. Keep your feet from following evil. So many Psalms and Proverbs use the image of walking on a straight, smooth path as the metaphor for living a righteous, obedient life in alignment with what God desires. The straight path is the right path. It's the best path, so stay on it. Not a lot of car travel back in antiquity, so traveling on foot was the way to go. Lots of travel on footpaths. So, this imagery is just common sense, basic to their lives. Keeping yourself on the right path is what gets you to where you want to go. Veering off the path, letting your feet swerve off course, that's how you end up where you don't want to go. Another translation of that last line says, turn your foot away from evil. As in, you're walking toward the edge of a cliff, so you should probably turn before you walk over the edge, right? Turn. Aim your feet in another direction and then go in that direction. That word for turn literally means remove. Like you are standing in a house that is burning down. You should remove yourself. So much of guarding our hearts has to do with simply removing ourselves from situations that are not good for us, that are not good for our hearts, our character, who we're becoming. On-screen environments, social environments, toxic relational or tempting relational environments in which we're drawn in closer and closer to compromising our character. And I get it. There's a certain thrill that comes from playing with fire and from dangling your foot over the edge of a cliff. But it really is only a matter of time before disaster befalls you. So it's not the way you want to go. The thrill will not have been worth it. Those who are wise in your life will tell you, douse the fire right now. Turn and run away from the edge. Flee temptation urgently. As soon as you realize that you're being tempted, turn your feet in another direction and run. And maybe you've noticed this, that the more time you spend in a tempting situation, debating whether or not to give in or not, knowing full well what the right and wise decision is, the more time you spend yourself in temptation, keep yourself in temptation, the more time you give the enemy to persuade you, to seduce you. So flee temptation urgently. The image of Joseph comes to mind from Genesis 39. He's put in charge of everything belonging to this royal Egyptian military officer. And the wife of this officer took a liking to Joseph, tries to seduce him. Joseph says, nope, not going to betray my master, not going to sin against my God, not going to happen. Well, she kept at it, and Joseph did his best to avoid her until one day she caught him without anyone else around. And this time she tried to seduce him more aggressively, more physically, grabbing a hold of his garment. And when she did, he bolted, turned his feet toward the door, and ran. Now, his garment was still in her hand. Not a good look, obviously. She's screaming while he's running out of her chambers without his clothes. So he lost his reputation. He lost his freedom when he was thrown in prison. But he did keep his character, his integrity. And if you know the rest of the story of Joseph, you know that his character served him and the rest of the known world especially well in the years that followed. Impulsivity. How's that word strike you? Is that a positive or negative word in your life? To be impulsive. Does that have a negative, positive, or neutral connotation in your ear? If it's negative, I want to invite you to think of that word more neutrally. Now, I know how your impulsivity has probably gotten you into trouble many times in your life. I know how it's gotten a bad rap. But you might need to be reminded that evil does not have a monopoly on your impulsivity. You can be impulsively good. You can impulsively flee temptation. Put your phone away, put it in the drawer, close the laptop screen, turn your feet toward the door and run. When you're tempted to conceal the truth and hide, you can be impulsively honest. When you're tempted to give in to fear, you can be impulsively courageous. When you're tempted to explode in anger and hostility, you can actually be impulsively calm and take some deep breaths. You could, right now, impulsively get up out of your seat, right now, and go out into the hallway and call a friend to tell them that you've been playing with fire recently. You've been getting yourself drawn in a little close to the edge of a cliff. You could ask them for their help. You could ask them to pray for you. do not let evil monopolize your God-given gift to choose to do the right thing right now. Your ability to make that choice might just be the greatest gift God has ever given to you. So you guard that. Above everything else, you guard it as if your whole life depends on it, because it does. Every decision we make, whether it's with our mouths or our eyes or our feet, every decision feeds and shapes our hearts, what we desire. We are, in the end, responsible for what they grow to desire. The world around us is convinced that the good life is unlocked by finding the desires that are already in your heart. You're really living the good life when you get what you desire. But that's really only half true. The truly good life is unlocked by finding the desires in God's heart. The truly good life is found only by becoming the kind of people who desire good things, the things that God desires. And then we rejoice when he gets what he wants.